Welcome to the new series of Life Stories with me, Des Tong. And where better to start with a legend, Jasper Carrott.
Hi Des.
Welcome.
Lovely to be here.
You looking well?
I'm all right for my age. Yep.
Just been on holiday?
Yes, just got back from Mallorca, had a couple of weeks there, and we had loads of friends out, and every night was party night, so this is my holiday now.
Right.
And it's important that you get rests in this business, as you know. And we're very fortunate we have a place in Mallorca, and we can pop over any time.
Okay, life stories. Let's go right back to the beginning.
Wow.
Right back to the
My
beginning.
memory's not what it was. Okay, but we'll give it a go.
I'll nudge you.
Yeah.
So, bought Robert Davis.
Yes, in Acox Green, Shaftmore Lane.
Right.
I'm sure it was a brothel at some stage. But yes, that's all my early years until I was about 19 was spent in Acox Green. And I'm always proud of the fact I live now 12 miles from where I was born. So I'm a Brummie born and bred. I love the city, and I've always tried to promote it wherever I am. So it's wonderful to be on, Birmingham's own TV station.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
And you went to Moseley Grammar.
I did, yes. I had a choice. You have three choices, really, and I put Camp Hill Grammar School first because everybody wanted to go there, but I was never clever enough for that. And then I had Moseley my second choice and Yardley my third. And so I got Moseley. But all my friends that I was with from Acox Green Junior School, they all put Yardley for their second choice. So there was a big divide between myself and my friends. But that was good because then I met lots of different people. Because Bev Bevan,
I was just going to say, yeah.
drummer in Electric Light Orchestra,
Yeah.
they sat us next together on the very first day.
Right.
And that was nearly 60 years ago, and we've been friends ever since. And of course, we're working together after
Yeah.
all these years.
Yeah.
Moseley was, I was never brilliant at all. I ended up with 2 O levels, maths and art, and that was the first joke I ever wrote because I got 2 O levels, maths and art. I was painting computers for about 5 years. And that was, oh, blimey, it still gets a laugh.
Yeah,
Thank you, Des.
Yeah.
And so Moseley really did form, I suppose, my life to be, but you don't realise it at the time.
No, of course you don't. And Richard Tandy went there as well, didn't
Richard
he?
Tandy.
So there's like ELO, Bev Bevan, Richard Tandy.
2 of the Fortunes. I
Right.
can't remember the names,
Right.
but they were at Moseley. But I can't remember anybody else.
When you were at school, did you have any inclination of like either music or comedy? Was that?
Well, I was sort of involved with music because of Bev and my other friends at Moseley who were in groups. I could never play an instrument. I certainly couldn't sing. But I was involved on the fringe. The comedy, I don't know where the comedy came from. I always had a sort of different sense of humour, if you like. I always remember the Smothers Brothers. They came and they were signed up to do 13 BBC One programmes. And they did 2, and it was so bad, they cancelled it. But I loved them. Yeah. I loved the Smothers Brothers. Yeah. So I suppose, looking back, I had that odd sense of humour, if you like. And I was never the class clown, but I was always interested in comedy, right. Like everybody else, with Hancock and the Pythons and not the Pythons, the Goons.
Right.
And then when I left school, I had a friend who had like a mother who was probably the first hippie. And she was bonkers, but lovely. And she had lots of records like, blues stuff, but she had records by Tom Lehrer and Bill Cosby. And that's really what got me into comedy.
Right. But when you left school, you and I checked this out, you worked at the Beehive.
Yes. Department store in Albert Street.
Right.
It was the oldest department store in Birmingham. And I started with Bev.
Yeah.
And without a doubt, without Are You Being Served, I am convinced was based on the Beehive. Right. Because we had all the characters, the Mrs. Slocums and the slightly gay, guy in menswear. Yeah. We had all those. Yeah. And I'm convinced the guy must have worked at the Beehive at some stage.
What got you into the folk music then? Because I know you had that club, didn't you? The Boggery.
Prior to that, I used to go to some folk clubs in Birmingham, and I enjoyed folk clubs, particularly the light-hearted side. And there was a big folk club at Digbeth Civic Hall run by Alex Campbell.
Which is the father of the UB40, isn't it?
UB40 guys, yeah. And other folk. And I used to go, and I used to enjoy them. And then I had a stint at Butlins.
Right.
And I had 3 months at Butlins, and I wasn't a red coat. I was a duffel coat, actually, delivering stuff. And I started one night a week for the staff, because there was not much for the staff to do. And I sort of just ran it. There was only about 20 people. But when I came back, I got the idea that I would like to start a folk club. And I was living with a couple of guys, and the one guy was an old Moselean, from Moseley Grammar, who was about 5 years older than me. And when I suggested this, he suggested the old Moseleans in Solihull.
Yeah.
And he put up £50. This was 1969, remember, which is a lot of money then. And when that's gone, that'll be the end. So we started it, and it was really successful right from the off. You know, we started with about 90 people, and within a month, we used to be getting 120, 130. The fire limit was 80, but it was days that you didn't have, you know, health and safety.
Yeah.
And I was with it for about 5 years, and it was really, really successful. And that's what got me into the business, because I was comparing.
Yeah.
And when you're comparing, you can't talk about, you know, pestilence and disease and world misery. And so I used to do jokes. I used to go down to the Cresta Club in Solihull and nick all the jokes from the comedians, and then do it on the Monday night, you know. And then I started to realise when I was doing other folk clubs that everybody was telling the same jokes. So then I started to develop my own material. And I was very influenced by Tom Lehrer.
Yeah.
And he played the piano and talked between songs. I played the guitar and talked between songs. And I built up a reputation.
Because at that time as well, you got Billy Connolly was doing, you know, going on the folk scene and doing the thing. And I suppose even like Max Boyce.
I never knew Max Boyce. Billy Connolly, because I ran a folk agency, you know, to deal with folk music, called Fingermigig.
Fingermigig.
That's right. And for 3 years, it was very successful in losing money. And I used to bring Billy down from Scotland for, it was a Midlands tour, okay, and he used to come down, good as gold. And on Saturday night, he was in Sutton Coldfield. On Sunday, he was in Plymouth. On Monday, he was back in Walsall. Tuesday, he was up in Liverpool. Wednesday, he was over in Leicester. So this Midlands tour was a bit, you know, whatever. And I did it about 3 times. And he was very successful. And then he put his fee up to £50. And no one would pay it. Yeah. And then he had a bit of notoriety. And they were going like, can you get me Billy Connolly? Can you get me Billy Connolly? And I went, and I phoned up, and he was £5,000. So the folk clubs didn't take him back. No. But, you know, great time. Time. That's where I learnt my business, of course.
DJM Records.
Yes.
You then got a deal with DJM Records.
Dick James Music, yes. Well, Billy had a very successful album out. Max Boyce, who had never met, but he was quite big in Wales, but because he had a massive album. So DJM, like most companies, were looking for a sort of an English Billy Connolly come Max Boyce. And DJM decided it was me. So I signed up to do an album for them. And they said to me, well, what we'll do is you can release a single and to see if it'll get some interest, you know, and get your name known a bit. And it was, that was it. And they gave me £1,000 to make this single, you see. So I had this idea, and I was working with an American guy, and he had a song called Little Big Bike. And we changed it to Funky Moped. Yeah. So I made Funky Moped as a single. And it cost £750. And with the other £250, I bought a Martin D28 12-string guitar. So, everybody was happy. Until the record company phoned up and said, what are you going to put on the B-side? Right. And I thought, well, I've got no money. But I'd made a private album, and I'd got this track called Magic Roundabout. And so I put that on the B-side. 2 DJs from Essex walked into DJM Records in London and bought 100 copies each of Magic Roundabout. So DJM, sharp as a button, said, why? they said, because we play it when we go for a whiz at half-time, for DJ, cup of coffee, we play Magic Roundabout. And it goes down and everybody laughs and everybody wants to buy a copy. So they bought 100 copies each and they doubled the price and sold it. DJM sent a copy of Magic Roundabout to all the DJs in the country, told them to play it, and it took off. And it is still the only ever hit single with no musical content, and yet it was a DJ disco hit. Work it out, Des.
So you're a pop star now.
I was a pop star, but of course, a hit single only gives you notoriety for about 3 or 4 months. It established me in the Midlands, so I was doing a few shows in the Midlands very successfully, thankfully. And I'd done a half-an-hour programme for BBC Midlands called An Evening Mislaid with Jasper Carrott, which was very well received. And then I had a big break. I was doing my show. When I say a one-man show, there was a support act. I'll come to that. And I was working at the Royal Shakespeare Theatre in Stratford. This was 1976. Right. And the support act was Victoria Wood. So you could see me and Victoria Wood for about £2.50. That's a bargain, Des. Come on. So I was doing this show, and DJM had asked Michael Grade, who was then head of London Weekend Television, to come up and have a look to see whether he could do anything with this Midland comic. So he came up and he saw myself and Victoria Wood. And a few weeks ago, Michael Grade was on radio talking about Victoria Wood, and he mentioned this night. And he said, well, I went to see this unknown guy called Jasper Carrott. He said, and I signed him up because I thought he'd got potential. He said, but don't ask me who the support was.
It's funny you should say that, because Mike Alexander was on the other week.
Yes.
Shirley Bassey's musical director. And he said when he first worked with Victoria, he said to her, forget the music, concentrate on the comedy.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah. And she had, she was only 22, 23, so she was very raw around the ears, but she obviously got potential.
Yeah.
And so Michael Grade gave me the opportunity to do a pilot. And London Weekend in those days, they had more pilots than BA, to be honest. And I did this really naff half an hour. When I say naff, the setting was like tinsel. It was like a really second-rate working man's club setting, Yeah. But I did a half an hour.
Was that the audience with?
An audience with, yes. Yeah. And that was my title, which they nicked later on. And I did half an hour, and the idea was to do 3 half hours. But after I'd done the opening one, he came and he said, can you do 6? He said, and if you do 6, I might be able to get it on the network. And that's what I did. So I did 6 half hours. And in those days, of course, independent television was all the people like, Granada, Time Teas, ATV, whatever. And they were all responsible for their own output after 10 o'clock. So I went out on London Weekend, and
were you doing Birmingham-based comedy on London Weekend?
Yeah, but it was nothing to do with Birmingham. All my early stuff, I only ever worked Birmingham 3 times in my early 6 years.
Right,
yeah, because it was profit in your own land.
Yeah.
I was far more popular in Liverpool, Hull, Portsmouth, and so the material really wasn't to do with. I did talk about Birmingham, but it was talking about Birmingham to people who didn't know Birmingham.
Right.
So I did half an hour, and I did, and I did whatever it was, but it was very successful. So he gave me these 6, and it took 12 months for my series, An Audience with Jasper Carrott, to go around the country, which was fantastic because whenever it went out, I used to book the theatres to coincide with. Post the show. Yeah. And I did about 125 shows, 125 concerts all over the country, 124 sellouts. And there was one that didn't sell out, which was Burnley, because I thought Burnley was in Yorkshire. And so we put on, because nobody in Burnley knew who the hell I was, except for about 40 folkers, Yeah. But a load of people, about 300 people, came over from Yorkshire to see the show. And that's really when everything started to take off. Yeah. That's when, I became sort of like nationally known. And in those early days, 78, 79, 80, it was massive, absolutely massive. I couldn't do the big 10,000, 15,000 seaters because, one, not many were around, and two, there wasn't the technology to get the screens up.
That's right, that's right.
But that kicked it all off. Then I did an hour's live from Drury Lane on a Sunday night, live to air on ITV, because there's only 3 channels then, and it got about 10 or 11 million viewers. And it is still the only ever 1 hour live to air stand-up comedy show.
How did that feel?
It was scary. It was scary.
A bit like me reading the news.
Like, as you said. But I was all right. I was confident because the material was good. But it was all live, and I was about 10 minutes in, and there was lots of giggles coming from the front row, and I couldn't. And I realised my flies were undone. Honestly, I know it sounds terrible, but it's on live television, 10 million people, and so I got the guitar over my crotch.
Yeah.
So because and maybe I shouldn't have done it really, because television puts £10 on, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
then you went from there. Then you went to BBC, didn't you?
Yes, they were looking for someone to front a Saturday night show, and they'd approached Dave Allen, who of course was a very big name, and he'd turned it down. And a bloke called Jim Moyer came up from the BBC to see me and said, would you like to do a Saturday night show? At that stage, there was no format, but he said he would like it topical. So I met a guy called Neil Shand, who was head writer for lots of different people. He'd been on That Was the Week That Was, Spike Milligan. And so I was talking through a show with Neil Shand, and while we were talking, Jim Moore came in and he said, Dave Allen's turned it down. Would you like to do the Saturday night show? And so we then conceived a 40-minute show that was live to air, that would feature, basically That Was the Week That Was, but with much more of obviously a modern update, but much more concentrating on a central figure, which is me, plus all the sketches and whatever. And that was very successful. I did 2 years of that, won a BAFTA. Should have done a 3rd series, should have done, but didn't do it.
Was that where the detectives came in?
No. From Carrott's Lib, which those 2 series are called, I then went on, I did another hour special from the Palladium, and then I've got to keep track here. Then I went to America and did some work out there and came back, and then I did another series called Carrott Confidential, which was pretty much the same as Carrott's Lib, but again with variations. And then after that came a show that I did called Carrott's Commercial Breakdown, which was showing adverts from all over the world that were funny and quite rude and stuff. And that was very successful, and got a gold medal from New York and a silver from Montreux. And that's where I met and introduced to the business Steve Knight, he of Peaky Blinders fame, Mike Whitehill. They became my main writers for about 7 years. And Steve, in 1989, 25 years ago, was talking about this Peaky Blinders thing he'd got in his head. And eventually he did it after 25 years. And of course, to great success. But he was my main writer along with Mike Whitehill. And we did Commercial Breakdown. And then we did Canned Carrot, which was, again, 6 half hours. I did 2 series of that. And in that was featured The Detectives.
So how did you get Robert Powell and George Sewell into comedy?
Well, it was one of those supercilious moments in my life. I was looking at The Detectives, and we were talking about it with Steve and Mike, and I loved it. It was in a 5-minute format then, and I loved it. And I said, who do you see as the other detective? And they said, oh, we don't want another comedian. I went, no, we want an actor, like a serious actor. I said, well, who? And they just said off the top of their heads, thinking that there's no way in God's earth he's ever going to agree to it. They went, someone like Robert Powell. You're talking about Jesus Christ. And it was very supercilious because I went, you want Robert Powell? And they went, well, he'd never do it. Robert, Jasper. They absolutely fell out of chairs. And what they didn't know, Rob and I were very close friends, and we'd always talked about working together. And I said, Robert, You have to talk like that to Robert, you see. I said, I've got a script, you know, I think I'll send them down to you, see what you think about it. And so that's how it happened. So the first thing he did, he rang me back, and they were 5-minute vignettes. And the first thing he said was, this could be a series. And of course, it was.
Yeah.
And it was one of the most enjoyable periods of my entire career. He is a terrific guy, terrific. And we were like blood brothers, you know. And we had so much fun. The end of shoot parties, Des, are notorious, legendary.